we're now moving into the discussion portion. So this is, once again, seamless, right? So one of the things that was a concern from Travis at NERSC was that API evolution was like the way we had done it originally. He thought it was too naive, and after playing with it, after he pointed out some ways that it was going to struggle, I agreed with him, and he recommended that we just basically do what KubeBuilder does. And the way that works is, let's say you've got V1 of the API, and you've filled in all the details and everything is working and you're very happy with that. And you want to try a V2 alpha 1. V1 has to continue to work. You can never, you can't break V1, but V2 alpha 1 can have, it's the Wild West, right? Like you can do whatever you want. And so what I had suggested was that if you haven't created a V2 alpha 1 version of the thing, it would just use the V1. And he said, look, that's fine, but with KubeBuilder and with a few other things, it just copies V1 into V2 alpha 1, and that way you start from a fully working resource that you can then change, but there's no fall through, there's no overlay, stuff like that. It also means then you have to map out which of the versions are we going to support, and that's what the APIs.yaml is for, and then how are they going to be supported, stuff like that. This is the feature that you're talking about, is like how the versioning is handled, and how version evolution will work. So that's, is that answering your question? That's how it worked.
Yeah, I was wondering if, because I think if I remember correctly, that project was started before that feature was implemented, so I was wondering if it was in the current version.
Yeah, so that's actually, so I didn't even know that's what that was from, but I can confirm we do have that in there. So we were able to just regenerate and it all just worked. So Fabrica works essentially. So yeah, it was cool. Yeah. Then Chris, did you have a question?
Yeah, so I had a question, I guess this is specific to the free tracker.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that you have this properties envelope where basically you choose this structure, it's schemaless, I guess you can put whatever you want to put in there. How does that work if you've got your building clients against that? Is it so for example, you're using HPE hardware and you put a bunch of properties that are specific to HPE, and then you have Dell hardware and you put a bunch of properties that are associated with Dell hardware. How do you then have other components that's going to use that information, or is that not the use case for a free tracker? I guess is my question.
So I think I understand the question. Yeah, so the question is basically if you have this properties field, how are you going to account for the differences between HPE and Dell? What are you going to do with that? Yeah. And so I think the way that I would answer that is we have these core device fields, and those are the only ones you can explicitly expect from free tracker. So if you're trying to build a generic tool that everybody can use, it has to be based on that. But let's say Dell wanted to have a specific one that doesn't work with HPE software, that would likely be a tool that just you could use free tracker, but it just wouldn't be generalizable to everybody's software. So the properties field, that was something we were talking about, was kind of having it be more structured of these are the only supported fields and they're optional. But we decided to go with just it's just a map of strings essentially. So the idea is we're not limiting you in any way, but that there's good and bads of that. You can't assume everybody's working from something. But that was the approach we took. Yeah.
That's a good question for the Dell folks, right? So when we put together the first, I was, involved a little bit. You did all the work, but I just sort of looked at the code as you were building it, and made some suggestions. But this spec, where you've got a device type, a manufacturer, part number, serial number, and a parent ID and a parent serial number, is that enough for all hardware? Can you imagine wanting to add a piece of hardware where you could not identify it with the portions of the spec that are outside of properties?
So Dell has its own catalog of unique identifiers for certain products. So Dell does have its own set of unique identifiers outside of these call to service tag. Not not the field replaceable parts don't have a service tag. The server or node as a whole has a service tag. So as long as these are the redfish names for these fields, it's not really a problem on the Dell side because we'll just use the redfish spec. And so if that's how you're querying it and generating those device fields, that's not a problem. We can add other things later on, like if we wanted at the node level to add a service tag, we could do that ourselves. And then that shouldn't affect the ability of FruitTracker to work with HPE hardware simultaneously.
And I think the service tag is a good example because I wouldn't imagine a service tag would be at the device level that we're talking about here, but that you would want to, at the node level, be able to say, here's like the same way HPE has their X name, which is unique for every node. You would want to have a service tag, which is unique for every node, and you would want to call it the service tag, not the X name. But none of that is actually in the FruitTracker API because we're just talking about anything with a serial number. All right.
Instead of X name or service tag, we might just call it vendor ID.
Sure. I think that wouldn't be in this API, but yeah, that would be in the outside, like some other node-centric API, which we're still kind of building. We have some ideas on what we want to do with that, but it's I think we're still at the point where we want to decide on the structure, the resource struct. Yeah. What's the difference between serial number and parent serial number? So, you want to answer? I mean, it's your.
I can, yeah. Yeah. So like the serial number, like so this is a DIM here. Like so like this is the serial number of the actual DIM, and then the parent serial number is like the parent serial number of the node that the DIM lives in. So it's essentially like how you can track the tree from Redfish.
Oh, that parent serial number is actually the node.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
And you, sorry.
Yeah.
And do you use that because the node is not actually in your data model? Like, why wouldn't you use a UUID to reference the
Yeah. So the question is like, why do we have parent serial model if our parent serial number? Like, why don't we just use the UUID? Is the node not in the model? And so the answer to that is the node is in here. Like this parent serial number like points back to a node. Like if you were to query Fabrica with that serial number, you could get it. But we're not using the UUID just because, like the idea there was to keep it like within Redfish, so we could keep things at that hierarchy level. We could use the UUID, but that wasn't the initial. Yeah.
You'll notice that he didn't have to hand me this microphone. We now have 2 microphones, so that'll make the discussion a lot easier. I'll just say that like one of the things that I like about the FruitTracker, the way that we have conceived of it at this point, and the way that Ben has implemented it, it is totally vendor agnostic. And there is no reason that you would ever have to presume. I mean, we haven't had another vendor try to use it, but like as we looked through this, figuring out how this could be based on Redfish trees rather than any specific vendor IDs. This is a place where the Redfish standard actually had some useful stuff for us, and so we assume that everything is going to have a serial number because that's a required thing in Redfish. However, I will say I have found some Redfish implementations that follow this standard. You must have one, and it must be at least this long. The standard doesn't say it must be unique. So we were querying a bunch of servers, and the serial number for every single thing in that server was 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So when we talk to our vendors who are not Dell and HPE, who do this right, and I'm very glad that iDRAC and ILO are good implementations. But when we talk to other vendors, we point things like this out. It may be standards compliant for Redfish to have that, but it isn't useful. All right, does that answer your question? Yeah. Other questions?
Good.
So obviously, basing this on Redfish means we don't have a schema for anything above the server level because we're using either the ILO or the iDRAC or whatever out-of-band management controller that has a Redfish API at that level. So that it has no knowledge of anything that exists above it, like a logical construction of a system or anything like that. do we see a potential need for creating a schema for constructing a system of nodes and other components, or having the ability to track things that don't necessarily have a Redfish API, like CDUs and PowerShelves and all those other little bits and pieces that make the thing turn on and run?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yeah, I think like you pointed out, like if you don't have like a part number or a serial number or something like that, like it just doesn't fit in this model. What you could do as a developer is I would just put in, 0, 1, 2, 3, and then put my things in the properties field. But we haven't, like, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. We haven't had that like be a specific use case that we're interested in at the time. So I mean, I think we could. Fabrica, you can get something working in a day. So I'd say, I think we could, but yeah, we haven't thought about that so much today.
I was just going to add that the Redfish, the 2022 Redfish, maybe 2018 standard does include a bunch of those kinds of things, and we don't see a whole lot of implementation of those. But the standard exists for like chassis and cabinet and rack level and things like that. And so I don't know if it covers all of the things you're thinking about. And I haven't seen implementations that actually do those things. But what we might want to think about is if the Redfish standard exists for the thing you're talking about, even if we don't have good BMC APIs for it, we could start modeling it in those ways. So yeah, that'd be nice if we had those, though.
We'll take that back.
This is just a simple one. Is there I see the name and the Redfish URI. Is that a redundant thing, or can we just,
Yeah, so the metadata name you can put as whatever you want. So just for this example, I put the name as the same thing as the Redfish URI, but I mean, you could put whatever name you wanted there. So that's just a poor example from me rather than anything. Like the metadata fields don't have strict, I mean, I guess the name metadata field doesn't have a strict requirement for you. It just has to be a string. So yeah.
But that's a good example of the envelope is up there, and that's all the Fabrica stuff that has to be there. And the spec is all of the stuff that we create for each resource. So yeah, we want to see something put in for all of those, but it is up to you as the implementer what goes in those fields.